had to go out of town. Things happen. I'm personally behind on where I wanted to be with videos, so I apologize. This is coming out on Thursday of the Clash. But we're talking about the Clash here. I already did a video going over the laps of the 2024 and 2022 Busch Clash. Very quickly, summary of why I did that is because mainly due to the amount of cars in those races. Both these races had 23 cars in it. And when we look at this race here at Bowman Gray, we're running 23 cars. The 2023 race had 27. And so that is the reason why I'm not using that race, because I think that's jumbling up a lot of things. As we look towards the Bowman Clash this weekend and how everything's going to go, for me, as I've done last year and the year before, personally for me, and I'm just saying me here, okay, this is how I do stuff, the salary on any of these drivers at this point in the week is kind of irrelevant, okay? Anybody can work at any price. Since I make my own projections, at that point when we have the qualifying grid, or at least, for the majority of the cars, that's when I can start looking at people, thinking they're a decent play or whatnot. But even in a race like this, if you look back at the last video or, of how we're going to be constructing here, it's really, at least for me personally, I'm going to be focusing on guys on 1 to 2 guys starting up front and the rest coming from place differential. And so for really the most part of looking at salary, I'm not really concerned. I mean, all these guys could be 0 or 10K. It doesn't really matter at this point, because anybody can work at any position just based on where we're going to finish, right? And so I'm not going to be going through, at least, certainly for this race, but really not weekly going through of what the salaries are for these guys. And specifically for this race here, since it is such a unique weekend, I'm not really going to go through and have, certain drivers that I want to prioritize. Now, the way that I would go about it is not, clearly, we've already gone through the laps for the 2 clashes that I would look at, right? So we already have an idea of who, performed decently in those races. But we can also look at the amount of fast laps that drivers had at short tracks last year for trying to look in more detail. I'm not looking at laps led because that comes from qualifying positions and or getting the lead on pit lane or whatever. I like looking at fast laps because that at least gives you an idea of who had, a fast car, even if it wasn't necessarily relative to where they were running in the field. Now, granted, this can be get off tire sequence or whatever the case may be, but I think it's a lot more easier to look at than just looking at, how many people led laps, who are the leaders in the short tracks. I mainly just want to go ahead and take a quick look at where people were at in the short tracks, just so people have an idea of where that is, or at least not even going through verbally, but you can see on the screen of who had fast laps. So we would be looking at, I do not boat, that's truck, that's why we don't have Phoenix here. I'm looking at Phoenix, Richmond, and Martinsville specifically. I guess we can go ahead and look at Gateway. But for the most part, there's really no track that's really worth the time of, at least for me personally, because when I do these videos, I'm just going over what I personally do, right? So when I look at these tracks here, right, I would argue the 2 Martinsville races, okay? So, who had fast laps in these? Just real fast. Bell, Larson, Hamlin, Blaney, Reddick, Truex, Elliott, Byron, Keselowski. Gibbs had 1, Kyle Busch had 7, Chris Buescher at 35, Berry at 10, and Bowman at 18 in the fall. We go to the spring, and anybody who had over 10 were Bell, Larson, Hamlin, Blaney, no specific order, Truex, Elliott, Byron, Logano, Wallace, Briscoe, and Cindric, with Suarez and Gillen having 7 and 9, respectively. And so, so from what I'm seeing right here, yet again, it could be depending on where they were in strategy, depending on what the race was doing. I'm not concerned about that aspect at the moment. We're just, taking a quick snap at who had a fast car at these races. Okay, so really anybody, right? For the majority of these, is like 11, 13 names, right? When we're looking at the Clash this week, okay, when we're looking at the cars that are qualifying their way in, right? And we're looking specifically at Sunday. Now, what I think I'm going to do is do the live show. I got a cough. Hold on. Give me one moment here. What I'm going to be doing is probably going live at the regular time, 10, 11 a.m. Eastern time on Sunday to talk about the 19 cars that are locked in for Sunday's race at that point in time, okay? We can at least, I think that's much more important, and analyzing the top part of the grid versus the back half of the grid, okay? Because when we look at the back half of the grid, and you look at where people are finishing, taking a quick gander, yet again, I went through this in more detail in the other video, but you look at the people who started near the back last year, we look at Blaney, Briscoe, Truex, Nemechek, more of these people, so on and so forth, and you see, specifically like Blaney, Briscoe, and Keselowski and stuff, and look at how long their race took. They really don't see any increases until we start getting yellows, right? Until we get like halfway. Okay, so we're really just depending on, us getting yellows in these situations for these guys to gain positions, and we also need them to not get lapped. Okay, so we're not necessarily playing the bad teams in these races. Now, personally, for me, I still think it's fairly easy to determine where, every team is in terms of tiers. Well, I'm not going to do it here. That's not the point. But, like, obviously, Penske, Trackhouse, Hendrick, duh. Joe Gibbs, duh. RFK, 2311. Like, if we have good teams in the back of the field, we probably want to play those guys, okay? Whereas we're taking a much riskier approach if the people in the back are colleague, front row, legacy, Spires, situations like that. Not saying they can't happen, but like for the most part, I would prioritize good drivers who make it into the field between the last chance qualifier and the highest points finisher from last year who didn't already make the field, starting last and stuff. Okay, so for me, the focus of the slate is not who are the final four people in, starting, between 19th and 23rd, or I guess 20th and 23rd. But it's more so what I want to do up top, okay? We have seen in both these races, okay? Now, granted, Gibbs got taken out late in the race last year and still remained optimal leading that many laps at his 7K price tag. But we look at the amount of people who start up front and, yet again, just going real fast at 2024, we look at where they were in this race, and a majority of them who started up front finished up front, okay? You look at Hamlin, you look at Logano, and then, obviously Gibbs getting wrecked, with like 2 to go. If you start up front, you're most likely going to finish up front, okay? And when I mean up front, I'm talking about primarily the top 4 drivers or people from the top 2 rows, okay? We're looking at the people starting first through fourth are obviously your heat winners, okay? My advice is, and yet again, this is just talking out loud to myself, that's why I'm making these, but talking to what I want to do is I personally want to be more hesitant on playing people in the heats that show speed, that are able to get through the field. Say you start 5th or 6th in the heat and you finish 3rd or 2nd. I'm going to be much more hesitant on playing those guys than I have in the past, okay? When we're looking, and yet again, this is 2024, when we look at 2022, kind of this, similar fate of if you start up front, you're most likely going to finish up front, and yet again, this race had more mechanical failures. That's why you see Haley, Briscoe, and Reddick, run into issues. These guys have mechanical failures. They were the fastest cars, or some of the most fastest cars, before we ran into issues, specifically Reddick and Haley. But you look at Logano, Kyle Busch, so you look at the first 4 starters in 2022. Haley had a really fast car. Reddick probably had the fastest car of the race. He breaks, then it progresses to Kyle Busch and Logano leading the situation here. Like, there's a reason they were the fastest in their heats. They were able to maintain, or whether they start first or finish, there was a reason they won their heats. Okay, you look here yet again. Gibbs, gets spun out, but we have where do the guys who start up front finish here? So we have 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th. Hey, if you're one of the top 4 guys, you probably have a good chance of having a fast car, duh. But maintain the running position inside the top 4, which is what we want to try and get between our lap leaders. We're probably going to need 2 lap leaders. We might be able to get away with 1 if it's a situation like Gibbs last year, but I think taking 2 of the top 4 drivers is what's going to be needed in terms of constructing lineups. Yet again, that's not why I'm here, going through salaries, because we don't have the starting grid, right? Going back, I'm going to be much more hesitant personally from chasing the guys who looked good from the heat. So you go from 5th to 2nd, 5th to 3rd, or whatever the case may be, because yet again, you're starting, in kind of a dead zone of this race. You're starting anywhere between, 6th to like 13th. We're not really seeing a lot of passing in that range for the most part. I'm not saying it hasn't happened, but when we look at the DraftKings points that's being allocated towards your lap leaders and the guys who start in the back of the field, outside the top 18, if you're starting between 6th and 13th, it's really difficult unless you are at a salary that just allows you to fit in. It's really difficult for you to be a priority play for me. And I've made that mistake more in the past or these previous years when I looked at my lineups of what I've been doing is I've been focusing on that range probably more than I should have. So when we get to Saturday's show or Sunday's show, I think a majority of my decisions are going to be made. It'll just be waiting on who actually makes it in through the heats. I don't foresee a reason to be live during the LCQ because, one, I'm going to update projections instantly as soon as we have the guys in it. So we're going to be projecting that stuff, up until the start of the race. The fact that we're going to be up against a pretty tight window between the LCQ and the start of the race, I don't think it makes a lot of sense for me to just go live there when I can just talk to people in Discord or, give opinions there. And I'm going to have a pretty good idea of what I'm doing Sunday morning. So that's kind of my justification through that. But for the most part, I think this race the slate will be decided on who the top 4 guys are. I think between all my lineups, I'm going to probably have 2 out of the top 4 starters in like every line. I think that's just what I'm deciding here. I think that'll be the best decision here. Now, yet again, we haven't even talked about, the style of racing here. I think that's kind of irrelevant. I mean, we saw very much last year, 2024. I mean, anybody can get run over and moved around. We get late race restarts, we get late race shenanigans. It's just a madhouse. Like whatever, dude. This is going to happen. People are going to dive bomb and shove people. And most likely, if you're getting spun, it's not if the leader's getting spun. Realistically, it's not because second place is moving him. It's probably because 4th car in the inside lane is hitting the 3rd car, which is hitting the 2nd car, which is causing the 1st guy to spin out. So, speaking out loud, probably rewording correctly, I want at least 1 to 2 of the top 4 starters in this race in a situation where we get a situation like Ty Gibbs to where ran up front all day, gets spun late in the race. I think that has a chance of happening if we have a lot of late race yellows. If it goes green, which we have seen in both of these races, you look at the top of your screen, you see where the yellows are. Wow, we went like Mach 7 there. I apologize. We see where these yellows are at the top of the screen, and we see where so that's where the yellows are coming out. Past that, we're getting pretty long runs to the end of the race before we get stupid in both these races. Okay, we look back at last year's race. We pretty much ran from the halfway break, 2 yellows. I mean, from there onward, we were pretty much green until we had a yellow here. And so I think a majority of this race is probably going to be much calmer than what is expected. And it's probably going to get, astronomically stupid at the end, as per the rules. As what NASCAR does, that's just what we run into. Because of that, yet again, I'd want the good cars, the good teams who come in from, the LCQs and stuff like that. Or at least good teams and good cars starting from like 17 to 18 on back, and then 1 to 2 of the top 4 starters. That's pretty much my approach for this weekend. Outside of that, real advice is just don't waste everything on the Clash. We literally have for how I have played over the years, I can say that Daytona the first week is an absolute positive ROI for me personally. So between the duels and the 500, I'm probably going to spend the most amount of money I've spent on the opening week at Daytona. Between all the races. So that is personally my priority, at the start of the NASCAR season. So the Clash, for example, probably going to do like 10 lineups around that range. It's easier for me to focus on where I want to be for me personally, it's easier for me to just update and fill in my lineups as close to last minute as I need to once I figure out where ownership and everything's coming in. And I can answer questions. That's just easier for me to manage. What else? That's my approach, So I'll probably have anywhere from probably 150 to 200 on the Clash, whereas, certainly for, Xfinity, Truck, and probably the 500, each of those races are probably going to be like 500 or if not more. I know the whole week I'm probably budgeting right now around 1,300, if not 1,500, so that's where a majority of my focus will be going in the month of February. Past that, I think that's pretty much my opinion, my preview on the Busch Clash, now that it's, the week of. Really fast, couple of things to note. I guess I should have done this earlier. Not really. Burt in the 50, more of a concern versus Tim Brown in the 15 car. Now, yet again, any idiot can, come from a short track, specifically Bowman Gray, and fit in here. But the main reason why I'm talking about Tim Brown is when we look back at what Priest was able to do in the 2022, and we look at what he was doing in that Rick Ware car before he ran into issues. Now, granted, he started way in the back here in this race, but and yet again, kind of looking through of a guy who wasn't necessarily able to qualify in the heats. But this Rick Ware car was with Priest. This is 2022 Rick Ware. Now, granted, I've been a Rick Ware stan probably way longer than anybody should realistically be, but running 16th in the Rick Ware car, pretty impressive. If I'm not mistaken, let me do a quick double check, quick looky-loo. And yeah, I was in the 15 at this point, so I was accurate. Anyway, Tim, not concerned that he's track champion. Who gives a shit, right? Like that's irrelevant. I'm just saying that the equipment that Tim Brown is first off, Rick Ware has proven that it's not the worst team. Okay, we've established that. When we look at, especially from a DraftKings perspective, not the worst team. Very likely that it's legacy at this point. But I'm not concerned if Tim Brown is one of the guys in the back of the field at the start of the grid. I'm not concerned about that. Burt, I'd be more concerned, but I'm not concerned about the two, new names between Tim and Burt. These guys have plenty of time to get their practice laps in. I also want to add that, yet again, I have not mentioned practice at the moment. Looking at the two Clash races that I've wanted to focus on, starting position has been the main concern, okay? The cars that are making the feature are the fast cars, right? For me personally, I am not, and yet again, this is more of a adjustment based on what has happened in previous years. I'm not going to be hung up on the practice Clash data as much as I have been. Now, we'll have 24 hours or, whatever, between Saturday stuff and Sunday stuff, but between the multiple groups going out for their allotted time, group goes in there and they get a lot of time, another one goes in there, and then once that happens, then we do the cycle again. I'm not going to be as concerned about that practice data because, yet again, track's going to change a lot. Teams are going to be learning a lot, especially for this small track. I'm not going to really focus on where people are at in terms of practice data for Bowman Gray Stadium. I'm going to be much more concerned on starting position and where these guys are at. I think that's probably the better move. But that's, at least that's what I'm doing. But when I'm planning out the weekend and looking at what I'm going to do, clearly I'll look at it, right? But I don't think that's the end-all, be-all of what the weekend is. I think it's much more focused on starting position. And that's personally what I'm going to be looking at more. I think past that, everything is cleared. I've talked about everything that I wanted to. Anyway, I'll see you guys Sunday morning to talk about this in more detail. Thank you for watching. If you would like to use my projections, Sheets' projections, if you'd like to use SaberSim, if you'd like to use any of the tools we have available here, consider joining us at a link in the description below. The TrueDFS one. I know there's a lot of links there, but it's TrueDFS one. And I'll see you guys next time. I'll see you guys Sunday. See you in the first live show of the year. See you guys later.